Trista Lackey is going to give her speech. She was, her dad was in the Army and traveled all over. A lot of time in Italy and Malaysia. That's where Trista developed her love for history. She has a master's degree in library and she got her bachelor's at USA. And I'm looking forward to this tonight. And this is a great crowd. So, Trista, come on up.
She had an energetic, persuasive personality, and she was an author, an editor, a journalist, an educator, a free thinker, and she was really interested in utopian socialism. In my presentation, I will introduce you to Marie Howland and share with you the people and events that shaped her life. Marie Howland was born Hannah Maria Stevens on January 23, 1836, to a poor family in a small town called Lebanon, New Hampshire. She lived with her mother, father, her older brother Dan, her younger sister Ada, and Melissa, and they were twins. From a very young age, she had a strong intellectual curiosity. Her older brother taught her how to read when she was 2. And her father taught her how to form her letters. She was determined to go to school like her brother, but she couldn't because she was a girl and she had to take care of her younger sisters. One day, she followed Dan to school so she could enroll, but she was caught by her mother. And Marie recalled, quote, "I lay down in the middle of the road and screamed when my mother, having missed me, followed us and carried me home. I was just approaching the schoolhouse. My screaming could only be pacified by my mother's finally yielding, though she insisted upon my first going home for a sunbonnet and to wash my face." Her mother then allowed Marie to begin her schooling. She sold strawberries when she was 8 years old and used the money to buy books. She continued to have a love for learning her whole life. And then in 1848, when she was 12, her father died, leaving her family in poverty. With no male relatives to help her and her family, they were forced to split up. She took care of her 5-year-old twin sisters while her brother and her mother worked outside the home. Her father's death greatly affected her because her mother had to find work and couldn't keep the family together. At that young age, Marie realized how her family had been financially dependent on her father, and she was determined to never be dependent on anyone, especially a man again. At the age of 15, she began living without her sisters in a boarding house in Manchester, New Hampshire, where she worked in a textile mill. She soon moved to Lowell, Massachusetts to work as a weaver and live with her mother and brother. Lowell was New England's textile capital, where females were offered higher wages in textile mills than they were offered in other American female employees. In Lowell is where she began to write pieces for the local paper, and she published those there in the local paper, and that's also where she chose her nom de plume of Marie. She was introduced to the theories of the French utopian socialist Charles Fourier while she was a mill worker in Lowell. Charles Fourier argued for cooperative communities that united people of all classes, collectively organized, and paid caregivers, cooks, house cleaners, and rejected the institution of marriage. He recognized poverty and women's oppression as structural problems of society and that they should be repaired. After living in Lowell, she moved to Boston, but she didn't have a job, So she wanted to learn how to become economically dependent. So she learned Pitman shorthand, and she wanted to be self-sufficient, so she knew that this would help her. She moved to New York in 1855 when she was 19 and worked odd jobs for a while. She began working as a teacher in Five Points, a part of the city that was considered a slum at the time. And while there, she lived in a boarding house with female friends who some people in society considered misfits because they were, one of them was an unwed mother, and they were actresses, and they were considered low at the time. And one of her dearest friends was Ada Clare, who was a writer and actress who people called the Queen of Bohemia. Marie made her debut on stage and met Ada Clare while acting at that theater. That was the only time Marie acted ever again. She thought that she just wasn't that good, so she went behind the scenes. So she soon became acquainted with an anarchist named Stephen Pearl Andrews, who organized a group of radical thinkers called the Club. And these bohemians met at a place, it was above a saloon in a building on Broadway, and they chose the slogan, individual sovereignty. One of the people who frequented the club was a Fourierist who was also interested in Charles Fourier's theories. And his name was Albert Lisbon, who influenced Marie. Marie was influenced by the ideas of feminism and the free love movement, which it really isn't what you think it is. It's based on love and not economic dependence and to divorce, and she thought that a woman should be able to divorce if she was not in love with a person. So the club movement espoused freedom from male domination and respect for women's rights. She embraced Fourierism wholeheartedly at that time. And Marie had a keen political interest in utopian socialism, women's independence, and the power of education. In 1855, while she was teaching in 5 Points in New York, she attended teaching normal school so she could become a teacher. And she met her first husband, Lyman W. Case, at the club. He was a Harvard graduate who had practiced law and was a good friend of Walt Whitman. He was also a dedicated follower of Charles Fourier and believed in the concept of free love as Marie Howland did. They married in 1857 when Marie was 21. She credited him with training her in manners, conversation, and speech. Soon after they married, they moved into a cooperative boarding house located in a 4-story house on Stuyvesant Street in New York City with 20 other people. And it was the brainchild of Stephen Pearl Andrews, the person that I mentioned who started the club, and Edward Underhill, two of the free thinkers of the club. They called it the Unitary Household. The views of social reformers Charles Fourier, Albert Brisbane, Stephen Pearl Andrews, and Josiah Warren inspired this experimental living plan. Marie desired to live in a unitary household where she and other residents could tie together the theory of utopian socialism and also the living arrangement gave her the opportunity to take advantage of the low-cost cooperative living and to socialize with its well-educated inhabitants. She attended lectures and voraciously read about socialism and living while she was living in the unitary household. It's while she was living in the unitary household that she met the man who would become her second husband. And his name was Edward Howland. Edward came from a moneyed family, and he graduated from Harvard in 1853. He was a writer, he was a book buyer, which would be very handy for her and him, he was also a free thinker. He was 23 and she was 20. He was 26 and she was 23. They met when Edward and his friend Henry Clapp Jr. visited the house. He was also friends with her husband, Lyman Case. The night that Edward and Henry arrived at the house, a soiree was held in the parlor. Marie and Edward danced with each other and kept dancing even after the music stopped. That night, her husband Lyman told When Lyman died in 1892, he left an annuity for Marie that she received until she died. And Marie moved out of the Unitary household after that, and she bought her own house, and she lived with her sister Ada and Ada's little girl. She and Edward were inseparable. She continued studying for her teaching diploma at the Teachers Normal School and graduated in 1859. She viewed her diploma as an admission to the middle class, which it's something that she'd always wanted, and that meant that she could have economic independence and not have to depend on marriage or a man. After receiving her diploma, she became principal of a public school there in the city. And then in 1863, Marie and Edward sailed to England to scout for books at book auctions in Leipzig, London, Paris, and other European cities. They married in Scotland in 1865 after Marie's divorce from Lyman went through. While traveling in East France, they visited the Famille Astaire, which is an industrial utopia with a cooperative living plan that's based on the ideas of Charles Fourier. And that is right in front. There's a statue of Jean-Baptiste André Godin, who founded the Famille Astaire. Godin was a French industrialist and social innovator, and the Howlands were thoroughly impressed by the Famille Astaire. The workers and their families lived there in the building. They built stoves there. They did everything together. They ate. And the schools were in the building. It was just a perfect thing for people like Edward and Marie who really wanted to live in a utopia like that. In 1866, they returned to the U.S. with valuable books that Edward had gotten while he was there, and Marie's determination to be an author. They both wrote articles for Edward's journal called the Saturday Press and other publications, but they could not make ends meet. So they longed for a better life, and they found it outside the city in Hamilton, New Jersey. There, they bought 22 acres with a house on it, and they called it Casa Tonti. Both of them wrote and published articles and taught high school. She wrote about diverse subjects such as feminism, child rearing, bee culture, Japanese education, and of course, socialism and women's rights. She wrote a novel, and she called it Papa's Own Girl, and she published that when she was living at the farm in 1874. The book combined Godin's ideas of Feurism with a romantic story. And many people at the time considered it a corrupting influence and were offended by its views on feminism, labor, and cooperative society. The Boston Public Library banned it from circulation. She tried to check it out from the Philadelphia Library and was told that only the chief librarian could allow someone to check out that book. And she said to the librarian, "It must be a very precious work, since you make it so difficult to get access to it." The librarian said, "Oh, no, it's not that, but its doctrines are too corrupting." So, that was an interesting experience for her. And one of the people who visited the farm where they lived in Casa Tonti was Victoria Woodhull. You may have heard of her. She was a free love advocate and presidential candidate in 1872. They also met someone who would be very influential in their lives, a person named Albert Kimsey Owen, who was a socialist railroad engineer and writer. And all three of them, the Howlands and Owen, worked together plan a development in a community on the west coast of Mexico in Topolobampo, which he called the Pacific Colony. The company he owned that financed the colony was called the Crédit Foncier of Sinaloa. And Marie wanted to build this community like the Familia Esther. And so she was very interested in that, and Edward was too. They really had thought that that was the best thing for society, was to have a cooperative living arrangement like that and working arrangement. So what they did was Marie wanted to start a newspaper. So she and Edward started a newspaper working out of their home, and they called that also the Crédit Foncier of Sinaloa. The Howlands moved to the colony in Mexico in 1888, taking with them all of Edward's books, around 2,000, and a printing press. And Marie was the only woman on the board of directors of the colony, and also the editor of the colony's publication. So she continued her work there, and she had about 3 or 4 other people working for her while she was down there in Mexico. She and Edward had begun writing articles in that particular journal, and before they arrived in Mexico, as I said. But Edward's health had begun deteriorating in 1886. No one really knows exactly what was wrong with him. He had mental problems. He seemed like he would just daze off and not be able to think, and he couldn't walk. He was slowly just couldn't walk anymore. So they had hoped that the Mexican climate would help him in his health. But when they arrived in Mexico, his physical and mental health got worse, and he couldn't walk at all, and he had to be pushed in a wheelchair, and he died in December of 1890 after them moving there. They'd been there for 2 years. A lot of people thought that she was an eccentric person, but she was a go-getter. One person, a colonist named Charles W. Moore, who arrived with his family in 1892 to the colony, described his first impression of Marie. He said that she was the first to greet him and his family and shook hands with them. He said she wore a garment known as a Mother Hubbard, which was like a long, basic dress, wasn't form-fitting or anything. And she wore an immense high-crowned hat of corn husks, such as the Mexicans weave. So it was this really tall thing, and he was just astounded. He actually said he was shocked by her appearance. And she was a big woman too, but she was very lively, and people just really were drawn to her. So he also said that when he was leaving the colony, he remembered her eccentricities balanced by her many good qualities. And some of the colony members, though, resented her and were offended by her actions, such as the fact that she used to swim in the nude, but she usually just did that in the evenings. And people just thought that was just the worst thing. She also did not ride side saddle, along with some of the other women in the colony who decided they didn't want to ride side saddle either. So that was considered unbelievable at the time. And she also encouraged dancing, which a lot of people didn't really think was appropriate. She also thought that women should wear comfortable, loose-fitting clothes, such as shorts and pants. She just thought that it was unbelievable that women had to wear these corsets, and they just couldn't be free and independent. At the time, one member filed a formal complaint against her, and she wrote a scathing letter to them. She just was really, really annoyed at some of the people that lived there, and they didn't like her. So the colony broke into 2 factions, not because of her, but caught in the middle because she knew both of them. She was friends with both of those two people. And many people, including Marie, were tired of waiting for a railroad that wasn't ever going to be built, that was promised by Owen, that it would be built and this wonderful city would be built there in Tumbleweed Bay, but none of that was ever happening. And she finally realized that this just wasn't going to happen, and a lot of other people did too. So she decided that she was going to leave. So she left the Pacific Colony in Mexico in 1893, visiting friends in Kansas, Missouri, and Texas. Sorry, just a minute. I just wanted to show you the inside of the police station that I can look at this here. It's now a museum, by the way. Here's a picture of Marie Howland and Edward Howland, who was seated, and that is Desmond on the left-hand side. That was his nurse. Here's a picture of Marie Howland in the back there. This is at the Tumbleweed colony, and those two, one of them, the second one, not the first person is Franz Schlesinger, and the second person is known as John Dawkins. They were both working with her in the journal that she wrote, Credit Francier. And that building there was one of the only ones that wasn't just a hut. They had built that before she and Edward had moved there. And so it was right on the bay. And that's where they actually had the printing press and all the books and everything in there. And that's a picture of it inside. That's John Dawkins on the left there, and then Marie Howland right there, who's at her desk. And here's a picture of Marie sitting there, and then some of the other people, and John Dawkins is one of them. They used to go picnicking out there. And these pictures, by the way, were taken by a man named Ira Nealand, who was he was a colonist, and he was the official professional photographer. I don't think he was professional, but he was the official one. And here's another picture of Marie. She had a violin. She used to play violin. She also could play piano. And that's a picture of her right there with her violin. And John Dawkins is the one standing in the back. And that person to the left with the beard, that is Franz Schlesinger again. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name correctly, but he was also one of her employees. And this is a picture of her on her way to La Loggia, which I know you can't really see her, but that is her. And there were actually more than one colony. It was all one colony, but two different places. And they were miles away from each other. La Loggia was the place where Edward actually moved soon after they moved to Mexico, because it actually had buildings that were sturdy. They had more people living there. They had better food, and he just felt better being there. And she felt better with him there too. But she used to go and visit often, and a lot of people used to go back and forth between the two parts of the colony. And one was at the bay, where that picture of that is, and then La Loggia was much further away. And so Marie left the Pacific Colony in Mexico in 1893, and she visited her friends in Kansas, Missouri, and Texas. And she wrote fiction while she was living out there with her friends and family. But she was just listless and didn't want to be there anymore doing that. And she was really hoping, she had really felt bad that she couldn't ever have the familiar stare that she had really wanted. So while she was living in other states. Her friend Christian Hoffman, who had also been a Tolobampo colonist, told her about the single tax colony in Fairhope. So she wrote a letter to E.B. Gaston in Fairhope asking about the single tax colony. He invited her to visit, and she then decided to move to Fairhope. And in 1898, on September 1st, the Fairhope Courier published this announcement, and I'll read it to you. Mrs. Marie Howland has determined to come to Fairhope, and as an earnest of her intention, has forwarded a sum of money to be used in buying a piece of improved property or improving one, as she may decide later. She does not expect to remain permanently until about January 1st, but may make us a brief visit earlier. We believe that Mrs. Howland will prove a great addition to Fairhope and are greatly pleased that she has decided to make her home among us. She is a woman of broad culture, an author of deserved reputation, a thinker and worker along form lines for many years, an accomplished linguist and a musician, something all will be glad to hear. She has a library of nearly 2,000 volumes, comprising the Howland and Lovell collections, as assembled at the Topolobampo colony, which she expects to bring with her and devote to the use and enjoyment of the community. And if all proves satisfactory, to make us a permanent bequest of it. As those familiar with the late Crédit Foncier Company of Topolobampo remember, Mrs. Howland was one of the most ardent workers in the enterprise, which was organized by A.K. Owen on his plans of integral cooperation. She was for 5 years a resident colonist there, and for most of it, if not all of the time, edited the colony paper. She has since become a single taxer and thoroughly approves of our Fairhope plan with its full measure of liberty to the individual. That shows you how they were so interested in having her live here, and she really wanted to live here too. She finally arrived in Fairhope on March 1st, 1899. She was welcomed with open arms in Fairhope. She soon became the associate editor of the Fairhope Courier newspaper, and she wrote a regular installment called Mrs. Howland's Letters to Outside Friends. And then all her friends from all over the world, she would write to them and publish them. And sometimes her friends would write back and she would publish them too. There were lots of different interesting things that people would say about her, about what was going on in their lives. And I do want to read just one more to you. I just thought it was pretty interesting. And kind of funny. Shows who she was. I'll have to read it after. Oh, here it is. Okay. J. Bruce Wallace wrote, this is in June 15, 1899 in the Fairhope Courier. J. Bruce Wallace wrote, Mrs. Howland, who was at the Topolobampo, Mexico, when I was there more than 8 years ago, and was editor of that colony's monthly organ, has now taken up her abode in Fairhope. Mrs. Howland's printing office and dwelling was the brightest spot in Topolobampo. What delicious cocoa she used to make. I remember it still, for luxuries were few out there. The cocoa, however, was not the chief attraction. Not even the music she played. It was the genial Marie Howland. So, when she arrived here, she brought all those books, well, 1,600 of Edward's books. She taught piano and French, and Edward's book collection had over 1,600 books, and it was delivered from storage in Kansas to her house in Fairhope. She became the first librarian, using her house as the library, and asked people to donate books to the library. She would do this in the newspaper. And so you could actually read what she was asking for, like juvenile books. We really need those. That's what she would say. And whenever a person donated a book, she would publish their name and contribution in the Fairhope Courier. 167 volumes were donated by her friends and the general public for the library to add to Edward's collection. The library officially opened on April 18, 1900. She shelved books by size, and she was the only person who knew where the books were located in the library. So she would fetch them for her patrons. And in 1908, this building, it's the library, was built next to her house. And she was the librarian from 1900 to 1917. One thing that happened when she first moved here, she was followed to Fairhope by her two sisters, Ada and Melissa, who she was very close to. She had kept in contact with them and her mother until her mother passed away. Her sisters, Ada and Melissa, also brought their husbands here. And all of them they all lived near her, but they all passed away living here in Fairhope. And they're all either buried in the Colony Cemetery or other cemeteries around, like in Barnum, I believe. She joined many clubs in Fairhope, including the Henry George Club and a literary club that she started. She was in a suffrage club for women, and the community greatly admired her for everything that she did for the community. She still rallied around women having the right to vote and being independent. Even here, she wanted women and men to be equal. So one of the reasons why she couldn't work as a librarian anymore is because she became ill, and she was confined to her home for quite some time before she passed away. And she died in her home on September 18th, 1921, at the age of 85. Her funeral service was held in the library, and she was buried in the Colony Cemetery here in Fairhope, which is on the corner of Section and Oak Street, I believe. Oak, yes. So you can go there and see her if you'd like to. I just wanted to read another quote from the Fairhope Courier. This one was a few days after she died. It says, "She was a noble, unselfish soul, ready to spend and be spent for any high cause which enlisted her sympathy and support, and devoting a long and active life to the welfare of her fellows." Marie often thought of herself as a social reformer, but she traced that desire to be a social reformer to her life as a poor farm girl, and also a mill worker, and being a mill worker as a young adult. And Marie was prolific. She was a prolific writer. She wrote articles on social reform and other things, like I mentioned, feminism. She wrote for Harper's Magazine and Lippincott's, among others. She also, as I said before, wrote for the Saturday Press, which her husband and Henry Clapp started. And that was basically a socialist magazine. By all accounts, she had a forceful personality, and she challenged the notion that the home is the center of female existence. She demanded economic compensation for traditionally unpaid female labor, and she was an early feminist and suffragist who thought that the economic exploitation of women's domestic labor by men is the most basic cause of women's inequality. That's one of the things that she wrote. She also argued for, quote, feminist homes with socialized housework and childcare before women could become truly equal members in society. She demanded economic independence for women and argued for women's rights to vote. She got her wish finally when, in 1920, a year before she passed away, women in the U.S. got the right to vote in the national elections. Marie Stevens Case Howland was a remarkable woman. And I do want to say that here in the library, we do have a bust that Fran Newman has created, and it's inside the library. If you go into the library, basically right inside the door, you'll see the bust of Marie Howland. Like I said, Marie was a very interesting, remarkable person. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trista. And do we have some questions for her? She's a Marie Howland and women's suffrage expert.
Yes, ma'am.
Library have any of her original books?
We do. We have Papa's Own Girl. You can't catch it. You can't. It's a rare book. It's not even in print anymore. But yes, we do. And we also have a book that Edward Howland wrote about Ulysses S. Grant.
But I mean, the books that she belonged here.
Oh no, we don't.
What happened to them?
Yeah, they're in the museum. Yes, ma'am.
How many books did Marie wrote?
She wrote 2 actual books, but only one was published. Yes, sir.
She traveled to France in the middle of the Civil War. Did she write anything about that travel? Because it could have been real easy.
She did. She wrote some articles about it. I didn't get to